Welcome back, folks. Delighted to have as our guest Professor Christopher Curry. We just said off air that he must come back because we haven't scratched the surface yet.
Yes.
He talked about the revolts that are important to us as a people, to know that we were not docile, we just didn't sit and allow the oppressors to take advantage of us. There were revolts, many of them, but we're going to come back and talk about it another time. But slavery in the Bahamas, or I should say the population of African enslaved people really exploded around the time the loyalists came, around 1783 kind of stuff.
Yes.
And that frightened the European population because they became alarmed that there were so many black people living within their precincts, because until then, their slaves basically lived on premises.
Right. And so they are trying to establish, as they had in Georgia and South Carolina, a plantation system where they export cotton based on the labor of the enslaved. But that failed. By 1810, you could describe most of the family islands as decayed, where most of the white people had already left. Many of them had either returned to England or moved to Nassau and found other ways of earning a living. But let me also say that this period is important because what you find is three different scenarios. A lot of time we tend to generalize about slavery in the Bahamas. It's important that we be more precise. In Nassau, in the urban environment, you had a lot of the enslaved persons post-1783 working on a self-hire system where because of the task system, they would usually finish their work by noon or maybe 1 in the afternoon. They were able to sell their labor to, especially the carpenters, the masons, and the blacksmiths, to other enslavers, and they were able to take home a third of whatever they made in that scenario. So Howard Johnson speaks about this self-hire system operating. So that worked in Nassau, the really only urban center we had at the time. Now in some of the major islands in the central Bahamas, you had a lot of the enslaved working as proto-peasants, as Sidney Mintz refers to them, meaning they live almost semi-autonomous lifestyles without any real supervision. And this was the case in places like Exuma, on Lord Rolls 4 plantations. And so they would be able to, after they finished their tasks, go out and fish. Sometimes they would fish for a couple of weeks or a couple of days. Others would stay and work the provisional grounds on the quarters, growing guinea corn or pigeon peas or cassava to supplement their diet. And so we found that enslaved persons in the central Bahamas particularly, because of their isolation relatively speaking, because of their diet, because of their lack of arduous labor, were probably the healthiest enslaved persons in the entire region. And then we go down further south to the Salt Islands, which was absolutely the worst place you would want to be enslaved outside of probably the Sugar Islands. And the reason is they worked on the gang system in the Salt Islands and Turks and Caicos and Anagua. They worked from sun up to sundown, and that stinging salt on the wounds, on the cuts, and then the brightness of the sun refracting off of the salt. And if you really want to hear about the horrors of the salt raking, you should read Mary Prince's diary. She's the one who actually wrote about those experiences and how horrible that was. So in the Bahamas, we have different systems actually operating even within the archipelago.
That's right.
Yeah, but the catch point I want to make, if I could say this, is that conditions in the Bahamas, generally outside of the Salt Islands, were more favorable because of the task system rather than the gang system. But on the other hand, the torture and the inhumanity embedded in the rules, regulations, and codes speaks to a racial ideology that was pervasive across the Anglophone Caribbean, inclusive of the Bahamas. You will know that our slave laws were borrowed from Virginia and Barbados. And so all those things that I mentioned earlier applied to the Bahamas. And particularly with the arrival of the Loyalists, and even in the Comprehensive Slave Act of 1797, you see a real attempt by the enslavers to control everything. They particularly took offense at the marketing activities of enslaved and free persons who really controlled the internal market system, you know, with the selling of their goods, husking and trading and peddling. The internal market was always dominated by particularly enslaved females. And so they tried in every, they still are. And this is why we see a kind of resistance, even in the day-to-day quotidian kind of activities, that enslaved persons in every way, shape, and form resisted those laws and those regulations that the enslavers tried to impose.
And that's why I wanted to just touch on that period, 1783 Loyalists, because their arrival with thousands of slaves freed, blacks, really, really exploded the black population, placed more fear in the European
It tripled the
population.
black population,
Yes,
and it doubled the entire population.
And it caused so much fear and consternation amongst the whites that they passed laws, and that was the beginning.
Oh yeah,
of the
and so you have what you see as a greater, a more racially stratified
That's
Bahamian
right, because
society.
until then,
Yeah,
they
yes,
lived basically in the same
Yes.
environment. Then laws were passed, and I mention that because that was the precursor to the establishment of these towns,
Yes,
Grantstown.
yes.
And these towns flowed out of the fact.
And William Wiley, who was at one point Attorney General, makes a comment that I remember. He's talking actually probably about Delancey Town and Grantstown. He's talking about the area, the precinct right behind Government House.
Yes.
And he talks about how these blacks congregate and they provide a refuge for runaways. And he says no white dare go into those towns at night, you know, because there's a level of fear.
Fear, that's right.
That they didn't have before of these communities that are growing.
They still have that fear in Bayham and Grantstown. But the truth is, that's when these towns begin to emerge. And when the interdicted captives were brought here, they were sent to Gambia.
Yeah, and you know the reason why they sent them so far flung is because they didn't want them to mix with the Creole black population.
And to be a part of.
But that was a foolish idea, because you must know these persons from the outset were already engaging in activities, marketing and trading, and even marrying each other.
And they tried to keep them separate, but that didn't work, as you
not
said.
At all.
Let's move quickly to looking ahead.
Yeah.
We're having a lecture,
right,
sponsored by the Bay and Grantstown Advancement Association in collaboration with the University of the Bahamas. And you are presenting at that lecture on the topic From Africa to Bahamas. That is a provocative topic, and it's intriguing because you will be presenting the historical perspective.
Yeah.
And we have a well-known historian, Patricia McCall, is presenting from the cultural perspective.
Yeah.
And the Reverend Dr. Philip Stubbs.
That's right.
Presenting from the religious perspective. That's going to be interesting.
I think so. I think
because
that's good.
especially, you know, the religious aspect, a lot of us have not really sat down and really gave that serious thought. You touched on it, the imposition of Christianity. And what we have is sort of a situation where the natural inclination, the natural worship inclination of people have been interrupted.
Yeah.
And even today, there's a certain amount of imposition because some of the European churches, they do not permit the natural response,
the
emotional.
Yes.
They frown on it.
Yeah.
And they put it down. They refer to the fire and brimstone prayer as if it's not intellectual.
All right. Yeah.
But it's a part of our culture.
Right.
And tell us a bit more about the lecture.
Well, obviously we're trying to bring in three different perspectives on abolition and emancipation. But you know, just speaking about the religious side, I often talk about the beauty of religious syncretism that you have in the churches over the hill, particularly. And I don't want to point out one particular denomination, because oftentimes these experiences cross disciplinary lines and denominational lines. But what you have is an African ethos that combines with Christian theology to produce a syncretic religious experience, highly emotive, very emotional, very much in tune with African traditions and practices.
It's a natural flow.
Yeah, and it's intellectually driven too. And this is an issue, again, I remember Hilary Beckles many years ago talking about how, for some reason, we denied the intellectual acumen of enslaved persons by saying that when they revolted, they was just going on emotions or running hot or whatever. When in fact, a lot of times they knew exactly what they were doing and why they were doing it.
Of course.
So this is also true in terms of religiosity and what they were doing, and their churches made complete sense to them. It was a wonderful way of remapping and remaking and really turning on its head the Eurocentric view of Christianity.
That's right. And they should be allowed to do it. Not very long ago, in the Bahamas, on the national radio, ZNS, there were only a handful of churches. The only Baptist church that was allowed on morning devotions or any broadcast was Zion, because Zion projected the same style and form of worship as
formulaic
the Anglican
state kind of
as
worship.
the
Yes.
Anglican, but they felt that the Baptists, the traditional Baptists, particularly the progressive Baptists, were too vulgar
Oh, yeah.
for them. But that's what we must learn. A lot of Bahamians, black Bahamians, and I know this is going to cause ears to perk up. They would be members of the traditional over the hill or black churches. But when they reach a certain level of advancement, whether financially, academically, socially, then the African-style church is no longer good enough for them. They must move into one of the other more socially accepted, more elite. But they don't know what they're doing. They're setting a conflict in themselves.
Yes.
Because if you watch them, they're sitting in their state, all buttoned up. But then the minute the drum sounds, they start to tap the feet.
That's why, and in my book, I showcase really Prince Williams, because one of the things I think about him as a Bahamian hero, because he stood up on more than one occasion, first to the trustees and even the governor in 1826,
That's right.
Who were trying to move him out of Bethel. But then a second time when the British Baptist missionaries came in and took over Bethel.
Bethel, that's right.
This was around 1832. He refused to accept their administrative control.
That's right.
Left Bethel, and instead of running away,
You went
hiding,
right down the road.
He went
Right down to St. John's.
He was in eye shot and earshot of them, and he made a defiant move
That's right.
by positioning his congregation perpendicular
That's a great
to Bethel.
That's a great sign of defiance.
Yes.
You know, you don't want me here. I can't operate here. But you just look out the corner of your eye. You will see me. And he ran down.
And then in the naming, he called it St. John's Native Baptist.
A particular Baptist. What are you saying is we are different from you
Yes.
all. You all are the
But
confused.
you can't move me. You cannot move me.
Exactly. And he established St. John's. But 35 years after he established
1835.
Bethel.
Yeah.
And so we have all, and this is very interesting, at least to me, because I like resistance.
So do I.
I like resistance. I think when you find that people are too complacent, too compliant, they suffer unnecessarily. If we're going to suffer, let us suffer.
There's a lesson in this for us too. As a living, breathing people in 2017, we are not a docile, acquiescing people.
No.
A lot of people like to say, oh, Bahamians were too
No
easy."
longer. No.
Listen, if we really paid attention to our history and we look back to this period of abolition, and emancipation, we would see that we had freedom fighters who did not sit back and allow things to happen. They took up arms, they stood for what was right, in the case of Prince Williams as well, and they fought for things that were meaningful to them. We see in the 20th century, the Burma Road Riot and the General Strike and Black Tuesday as well. People did not sit back and just acquiesce. It's a sad indictment on us, I guess, today, that a lot of times we've become complacent and we're not willing to stand up and fight like our predecessors.
But a lot of it, our history is not known because people continue to point to Burma Road Riot as the beginning of this fight for freedom. But in fact, there were two riots in Grantstown, you know.
Yes.
There were two riots because the residents there were dissatisfied.
I like to always draw people's attention to the long struggle for freedom, which emanates back to this period that we've been talking about all.
Listen, from the human spirit is indomitable. I mean, really.
Yeah.
And from the first moments of slavery, once they get over that impact of being in a strange land, name taken away, religion taken away, language taken away, all that, the struggle for freedom began. It may have just been a thought.
Yes.
But the struggle for freedom began back then.
And there was continuity in the post-emancipation period. I read about lodges that were really active in the 19th century, coming out of Bain and Grantstown.
Oh yes, the Yoruba Lodge.
Man, and listen, they would march up annually to Government House to present their grievances to the governor.
That's right.
They did that as a form of protest. I call that proto-political activism.
And in Bain, Grantstown particularly, and that's where my heart is, most of the progressive movement, that's the epicenter of the progressive movement.
Yes.
Of the struggle.
Yeah.
Much before Burma Road, much before majority rule or independence, they were there. And so it is very important for us to understand
Yeah.
the history of our people. But we didn't tell them about the lecture, where, when, and
No, let's do that. Let's do that.
better let's do that.
Yeah, so it's coming up on the 15th of August. That's actually exactly a week
today.
And it's going to be 6 to 8 p.m. and it's going to be in the Harry C. Moore Library and Information Center Auditorium, HCLM? No, I always get it. Let me just say Harry C. Moore Library.
Yeah, that's good
And it's
enough.
an auditorium, and it's 6 to 8 p.m. And the general public is invited to come.
And it's free of charge.
Absolutely.
Because we want you to come and get the information. We've been saying to people, bring your family.
Yes.
This is a family experience.
And bring your children.
Especially the children.
Absolutely.
Especially the children, because this is an experience that they must have. Because slavery in the Bahamas was a dark period, but it also had so many bright spots.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so many persons fought for the emancipation of the enslaved people. White people, let's not forget that.
Yes.
White people fought very, very strenuously over the years, and some of them suffered. We had people in the leadership. Governor Sir James Carmichael Smith, he was an abolitionist, and he fought against slavery. So we have to just embrace that period. As they say, it is what it is.
Yeah, so we should not hide from the warts and the bumps in our past, but we need to expose them, we need to talk, we need to be more honest. Let's not perfume our past.
That's right.
And when you come to this event next Tuesday, you will hear the unsanitized version of Bahamian history told from 3 different angles, and it's worth every minute of it.
That's right, and unfortunately, some of our white Bahamians, they're a little uncomfortable when we discuss this. And some of them tend to say, oh, they're bringing up this race thing again. Why they don't let that go? I mean, that's history, that's so long gone. But we cannot be whole until we know everything about ourselves. And this lecture is going to help to advance that. And we have a number of other events. We wish to congratulate the other former slave liberated towns. Fox Hill, today at this moment, they are having events. Gambia had events. They said, you know, they had an event on Monday past where they had a festival. Of course, we in Bay and Grandstand, we came late. You know, we're just getting started up. Fox Hill has been doing it for decades, Gambia for decades. And we had a wreath-laying ceremony at the Southern Recreation Ground, one of the most iconic spots in New Providence.
Yes.
Southern
That's
Recreation
where
Ground.
great speakers would often come
absolutely.
in. The best, most profound oratory would have been right there at the Southern Recreation.
Right
Marcus Garvey spoke there, man.
Exactly, we said that,
Yeah.
and so many others, but that is why we laid the wreath there, in memory of the many, many enslaved persons who lost their lives pursuing freedom in many different forms. So we laid that wreath in memory of them on August 1st, last week Tuesday. And then on Sunday past, we had a Thanksgiving service at Grandstown Wesley Methodist Church, and it is symbolic that we went there because that was formed by the first members were liberated Africans.
Yeah, I was talking before we got started about the Adderley family. Roseanne Adderley's book, New Negroes, traces in part the origin and development of Wesley.
Yes.
And going back to William Parliament Adderley, and then, of course, A.F. Adderley, and
right down to Paul Adderley, the whole generation.
Yeah, so you have generation after generation of activists, parliamentarians.
And they were all from that same area.
Yeah, Urubas.
You know, Delancey, Arubas,
Yeah.
Delancey Town, Baintown,
Yes.
Grandstown. There's so much more. Chris, I promise we have to come back again because we just skimmed over so much.
That's
but
right.
Time has gone on us, and we simply wish to thank you.
It's been a great pleasure of mine to be here.
Yeah, well, listen, we're just touching the tip of the iceberg. We must come back again because this must be an ongoing thing. It must not be just every August 1st or thereabouts we get together and talk about it. It must be an ongoing educational process because our people need to be freed. If you don't know who you are, then you will believe who they say you are. And that is why I like to close with this humorous comment. They say we are so lost, many of us, that you go to Miami for 3 weeks and you come back speaking American. But I like to even top that by saying, go on the streets and see a lot of our young men. They are speaking purer Jamaican than the Jamaican. They've never put foot in Jamaica.
Oh, boy.
You understand what I'm saying? Because we grasp onto things to try and identify ourselves, to validate ourselves, because we don't know.
They'd rather listen to Popcan instead of Pat Ramming.
Exactly, there you go. We're going to try to change that, not only at the lecture, which again, Tuesday the 15th of August at the Harrymore Library's auditorium, 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock, 2 hours. So come on time, bring the family, especially the children. Professor Curry and his colleagues are going to really give us an education, and we will continue this dialogue. And so thank you very much for being with us this evening. You've been listening and watching, moving forward, and I think Professor Curry helped us to move forward a little in this whole dialogue. So until next time, good night. God bless you.
Only love can save us now.